Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name's Chris and I am a full-time working dad, but I do enjoy baking on the side, typically for my kids' birthdays and family members. And so I'm not an expert in any way, but I do enjoy it and decided to start a YouTube channel because I do make a lot of mistakes and I am open to any feedback in the comments, and also hopefully from my mistakes those of us that aren't professionals can learn a little bit. So today we're actually going to be baking a chocolate cake that I did for the first time a couple weeks ago with my 3-year-old son. We were looking in the pantry just to see what ingredients we had, and we found a box of Thin Mints. So we decided to do a Thin Mint chocolate cake, and it was absolutely delicious. So for my birthday I decided to make that cake again. Let's dive in and see how it goes. Okay, before I start baking, to make sure I even out the batter in all the pans, I like to first measure my empty bowl. It's about 1175 grams, and then take note of that so that when I have all the ingredients in the bowl, I can then divide it by 4 and then evenly distribute it. So if you don't have one of these, highly recommend it. All right, this recipe calls for enough ingredients to fill 2 9-inch rounds. I'm going to be doing 4 8-inch, plus I was wanting to make some mini cupcakes for the kids afterwards, so I'm going to double the recipe. So for that we're going to need 4 cups of white sugar, then we're going to need 3.5 cups of all-purpose flour, Alright, then we're going to need 2 cups of unsweetened cocoa powder. I like to use this one. I don't know if there really is a difference, but this one seems to have the best chocolatey taste that I've found. Three teaspoons of baking powder, which is the same as 1 tablespoon. 3 teaspoons of baking soda, which is the same as 1 tablespoon. 2 teaspoons of salt. Okay, and then at this point I usually just whisk it up a little bit just to make sure it's all mixed with my baby whisk. Okay, we whisked together all the dry ingredients. Now we're going to add in the wet ingredients. We need 4 eggs. We need 2 cups of whole milk. Luckily, with 2 little toddlers in the house, we have plenty of whole milk. We need 1 cup of vegetable oil. Balls. Put a little bit more. It's going to be fun to clean up. Alright, we need 20 mLs of vanilla extract. So that's 1 tablespoon and 1 teaspoon. Now we are going to stir. Start on low. And then while that's going, we actually need to, the recipe calls for 2 cups of boiling water, but I actually like to put 2 cups of dark roast coffee. It brings out the chocolate flavor a little more. Just scrape down the edges to make sure we've got all that powder. We now have our 2 cups of boiling coffee, so I'm going to stir this on low and then slowly pour the coffee in. And don't panic if the batter is very liquidy. The first time I made this, I thought I messed up. But it smells delicious. Alright, I can let that stir for a minute. And then we're going to take this off and hand mix it a little bit more. We're just going to hand mix this, make sure we get all that batter from the bottom mixed in. You can see how liquidy it is. The batter's nice and mixed. I'm going to steal some of this for those mini cupcakes real quick, and then hopefully we'll have enough for the 4 8-inch rounds. We got the 36 mini cupcakes going, so now with the leftover batter we're going to fill up these cake pans. For a liquidy batter like this, I typically spray the pans with some sort of grease, and then I powder them with flour. If it's a thicker batter, then I'll put parchment paper on the bottom and not do the flour. But when it's liquidy like this, the parchment paper is not really going to do anything. So first, we're going to get our scale back out, put this on here, and we're at about 37.25 grams. We have 37.25 minus the 11.75 of the bowl itself. So that's 25.50. And then we're going to divide that by 4, 637 per pan. I like to give a little buffer, so we'll do about 600 for each pan. That should be enough for 4 of them. Take our pan, first pan here, go ahead and zero it out, and go ahead and pour to about 600 grams. Alright, well, that's why I leave a buffer. That one's about 620. Do this for the other 3. 606. Alright, and our last pan here, 610. Perfect. Apologies at the beginning. I forgot, preheat your ovens to 350. Now I'm going to put all 4 in here, but about halfway through the bake I'm going to rotate them just to make sure they're all cooking evenly. And I don't think my oven's perfectly level, so by rotating it, it helps the cakes be a little more even when you pull them out and level them. Getting yelled at for keeping the oven door open too long. All right, and then we're going to let this bake for about 20 minutes, rotate them, and then about another 10 minutes, give or take, but checking closer to the end to make sure we don't overbake them. It has been 20 minutes now, so we're going to go ahead and rotate the cakes, turn them 180 degrees, and I also rotate where they are in the oven. Got my trusty oven gloves on, safety first. Okay, and then probably another 10 minutes, but I'll check them in about 5 and then keep checking them every few minutes until they're just done. It's been an extra 5 minutes, so 25 minutes total. Just stuck a toothpick in there, came out nice and dry. So we'll go ahead and take these out. I'm going to put them on my stove rack for about 10 minutes, and then we'll put them on a wire rack. It's been a little over 10 minutes. The pans are still warm, but at this point we're going to just quickly go around the edges just to make sure it's not sticking. and then we're going to put them on the wire racks to cool a little more. Haven't quite figured out the best way to do this, but just with clean hands. Do a quick dump. Oh no. Well, no big deal. That can be fixed. There we go. Perfect. I'm going to go pop those in the fridge, probably for an hour or so, and then we'll make the frosting and start assembling. While the cakes are cooling in the fridge, I am going to just make a quick simple syrup. Super easy to make. Equal parts sugar to water. So 1 cup of sugar, 1 cup of water. Then we just throw that onto the stove until the sugar is completely dissolved, stirring, and then just let it cool to room temperature. We are now going to make the frosting. I'm using Sally's Baking Addiction recipe for her chocolate buttercream. I use a lot of her recipes and they've never steered me wrong. But I'm actually going to quadruple the recipe just to make sure I have enough for the cake and the cupcakes, and then if I have any left over I can just freeze it and use it at another time. I don't think this bowl is big enough to do quadruple the recipe, so I'm going to do a double of the recipe and then I'll do another double. 1 cup of unsalted butter, so I'm going to do 2 cups or 4 sticks. And then we're going to whisk this or use the paddle mixer for about 2 minutes to soften up the butter. Now we're going to beat this on medium for about 2 minutes. Just going to scrape real quick and then run it some more. All right, that should be good. Just make sure when you do this, the butter is at room temperature. And now the recipe calls for 3.5 cups or 420 grams of powdered sugar. I like it when a recipe provides the weight because then we can just get our scale, put this on here, and make sure we tare it. And now we can just add powdered sugar right in there. So since I'm doubling the recipe, I'm going for 840 grams. So we can just dump the powdered sugar in until we hit 840 grams. And then 41 grams of cocoa powder. Again, I'm doubling it, so I'm going to do 82 grams. And then we need 3 tablespoons of heavy cream. So since I'm doubling, it's going to be 6 tablespoons, so it's about 90 mLs. 1/3 of a cup is 80, so I'll do 1/3 of a cup and make sure this is at room temperature as well. 2 more teaspoons, which will be another 10. 1/8 teaspoon salt, so doubling it, we need 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt. It calls for 2 teaspoons vanilla extract, so I'm going to double it for 4. I'm actually going to take 1 away. I'm going to do 3, and then I'm going to put some peppermint extract. I'm going to start with 2 teaspoons, see where that gets us. Last time I think I had to add a few more to really get that peppermint taste. And now we're going to mix this all together. I have this that will help with some of the dust. I learned the hard way that this brings a whole lot of dust. And then I still like to cover it up just at the start while everything's mixing together on low, and then we'll bump it up to high. one more scrape real quick. Let's go ahead and stop there. I'm going to do a quick taste test. See how minty it is. It's pretty good. I'm going to add another teaspoon peppermint extract, and then I think it needs a tiny bit more cream. It's a little thick. All right, the peppermint taste is great. I'm going to put a little bit more cream in there. I'm going to do this whole thing again. I won't record it, but I do need to double this batch. So I'm going to put this all into another bowl, put another batch in here, and then combine them, and then we'll start assembling the cake. I have combined the two batches. I'm just going to mix it all together on low. I'm not the best when it comes to frosting. For whatever reason, I get a lot of air bubbles in it, and I'm trying to figure out a way to decrease that. So if anyone's got any tips, please let me know. But I've started to put it on low for a little while after mixing it all together, just to see if that helps decrease the air bubbles. And it seems to help a little bit, but you'll see when I start frosting the cake that there still is quite a bit there. Okay, that looks good. I took the cakes out of the fridge. They're nice and cooled. Now I'm going to level them. I like to use this tool from Wilton. I'm sure if you just use a serrated knife, it's probably faster and easier. I'm just not that comfortable at making sure my cakes are level, so I use this tool. So I put a piece of one of the cakes on a piece of parchment paper. You can adjust the height that you want this to be at, and then I just saw through the cake. And then that'll be my bottom layer. And then I love to save the toppings to snack on before I can eat the cake. It's also a good way to test your cake to make sure it tastes all right before serving it. So I'm going to put this onto a cardboard circle, and then we'll do the others and start layering. So I have my cake spinner, whatever you call this thing, and then I like to use, it's like a non-slip mat that I cut into a circle to put underneath the 8-inch round cardboard. Put a little bit of frosting. Well, whoops. All right, put a little bit of frosting on the bottom just to make sure cake sticks, and then go ahead and center that on there. And then I like to take the simple syrup I made, put it in one of these. And I don't put a ton because this cake is pretty moist already, but I just put a little bit down the middle and a little bit along the edges. I keep a finger on top because there was a time where I pushed and the top popped off and ruined everything underneath it. Okay, now I'm going to put some frosting into a piping bag, pipe this layer, and then we'll start stacking. I like to get a bag and a cup and just hold it over there and start. All right, and then I grab the spatula. I use the piping bag, just it helps me make sure my layers are even. Now at this point, we're gonna get the Thin Mints, smash them up into crumbs, and put a crumb on this layer before we stack. I use quite a bit because when I put it between every layer, and then I usually put it on top at the end and on the bottom siding as a little decoration. Okay, don't feel any large chunks in there. We're just going to sprinkle this. Just be prepared for a messy kitchen counter and floor, but it's worth it. That looks good. Go ahead and smooth it out. And then more thin mint. Now this one, I'm going to put the simple syrup on down here because I'm actually going to invert it so that we have the nice flat edge on the top. Just let that soak in a little bit. Okay. Looks pretty good. Now, going to do a crumb coat. This is a very crummy cake, as you can see. I'm going to do a crumb coat and then pop it in the fridge for a little bit, and then we'll finish up. The crumb coat was pretty thin. I'm just going to start scraping what I have now. This might be enough for a full crumb coat. Not quite. So I don't want to get crumbs in my main batch of frosting. So clean the blade off. It's a lot easier when the blade is cleaned after each pass. That should be good. Flatten the top a little bit. It's just the crumb coat, so it doesn't need to be perfect. And then this frosting I'm scraping off, I'm actually going to use on the top. It doesn't matter if there's a little bit of crumbs in it, since we'll be putting thin mint crumbs all over the top anyways. So I'm going to go pop this in the fridge for about 30 minutes, make sure it's hardened, so when I frost again, it doesn't push down and make the frosting bulge out a bit. But that looks good for now. Cake is out of the fridge. I decided to transfer it to a bigger board. I thought I had a cake board, but I guess not, so we gotta use this thin one. So now I'm gonna put frosting, and don't have as much frosting as I actually thought we would have. Those cupcakes used up more than I had hoped. But our crumb coat was a little thicker than usual, so I don't think we need to add too much more frosting here. So I'm going to start with the top. You see what I was talking about with my air bubbles. There's just a ton of bubbles in this frosting, and I don't know how to fix that. So if there's anyone who has a suggestion how to make this smoother and less air bubbles, that would be greatly appreciated. Now let's get the sides, but I'm not going to do too thick of a layer here, and once we start scraping it off, it should give us just enough to finish it, because I don't want to make another batch. I'm not a professional. This is very sloppy. Frosting is not my strong suit. So that's all the frosting we have. Don't have enough for the back side. So we're going to start here and scrape this side down a little bit. And then what we scrape off, we'll start using on the other side. Might actually get away with it. All right. Well, we got all the cake frosted. May actually pull this off. The top doesn't need to be too perfect because I'm going to put crumbs on the top, and I actually might do a drip on the top. That looks pretty good to me. Now, I'm going to put this back in the fridge for about 5 minutes, just to let it chill. And then there's a little trick I learned from another YouTube channel that I've been practicing. It seems to work pretty well to kind of smooth it out a little more. So I had it in the fridge for about 5 more minutes. The frosting has formed sort of a crust on it, so it's not sticking. I believe it's Caroline Cakes. That's the YouTube channel. She recommended using Viva Signature Cloth. It's like a paper towel, but it's a little more fabric-like, and it doesn't stick to the frosting. And so if you just place it on there and use a fondant smoother and smooth this frosting with this cloth, you can kind of smooth it all out, get rid of any of those little imperfections. So this definitely doesn't work with normal paper towels. Ask me how I know. I don't recommend doing it once it's just frosted because it will stick. So just put it in the fridge for about 5 minutes, let it cool off and get a sort of a bit of a crust on it. So there's still air bubbles in here. I'm going to do a drip, I think, on top, as well as thin mints sprinkled on top and along the side a little bit. So with the drip and those sprinkled cookie flakes, it should cover most of those imperfections up. I'm going to put cookies along the side, just cookie crumbs about up to here, just going around putting them on the side. It's going to get really messy. And then I will put it back in the fridge, start making the drip, take it back out, and then we'll do the drip, finish with those poofs, and then put the crumbled cookies on top. These crumbs actually taste really good with the frosting, so I was a bit tempted to do the whole cake like this, but it does look a little better, I think, with it just being the lower border. And then I'm going to take a lot of these crumbs off, and then we'll use those for the top. Catching these. Alright, and then I'll try to push that into the cake a little more, just to get a nicer tight border. Fill in any gaps that you see, or bring the border up a little higher if you want. That looks good. Okay. We'll go ahead and pop that back in the fridge for about 10-15 minutes while we make the drip. And then by the time the drip's done and cooled off a bit, this will be nice and chilled. I'll put a link in the description for the drip recipe that I use. There's a YouTube channel that I follow that she does a great regular chocolate drip and then also a white chocolate, which differs a little bit. But basically, got to this point by simmering the whipping cream. It's a 1-to-1 ratio between cream and semi-sweet chocolate. And then you just let it sit for about 30 seconds so the chocolate softens up, and then you start stirring. Looks a little chunky at first, but it'll start coming together. So what I like to do at this point is actually add just a little bit of black gel, dye, food coloring, just to make it look a little darker so that when you drip it on the cake, there's a bit more of a contrast. Got my black gel. Actually grab a toothpick, and you really don't need that much of it, just to make it a little bit darker. a little bit more. Got it all over my hands, so that'll be fun to get out. Try to avoid getting it on your countertops. Oh boy. Alright, that's a little darker. The consistency looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and pour some of this into a piping bag. I found that to be the easiest way, but I know some people like to spoon it on top. Usually cut a little tip off. Let's see what happens. Looks pretty good. I'm going a little further than I would like. Shoot. Usually don't like them to go quite as far. It's probably still a little too hot. Also, they recommend to chill for about 30 minutes. So my cake just might not be quite cold enough. Try just to get a little bit more here. As close to that line as possible, but not too thick because you don't want it to cause another drip. There we go. Fill in those little gaps. Okay, and then I'm going to do the middle. Just like to leave a little border just to make sure it doesn't start dripping over the edge. You can see it slowly making its way, and then the poofs will cover up that border. I think the drips look really good on this side. Maybe some variation in length would have looked a little nicer, but the back side where I started, I may either just put a little too much or it just wasn't quite cool enough. Okay, I'll take the rest of our crumbs and sprinkle on top. Well, cake is done. Thank you for joining me on my first YouTube video. Overall, pretty happy with how it turned out. Here, I'll give you a little, a little spin. I think what I did wrong here is that I should have let the cake cool after doing the drips before doing the poofs on the top. That caused some of them, you can see there, to start sliding off a little bit. But overall, pretty happy with how it turned out, and I know that it's going to taste amazing. So highly recommend this cake for anybody that likes Thin Mints, anyone that likes chocolate and mint. It is fantastic. Remember, I doubled the cake recipe. I think it was perfect for 8 rounds, and the cupcakes I made, the recipe that I put in the comments will be for the normal 2 9-round instructions. And then quadrupling the frosting was actually perfect. Again, I did use it for some of the cupcakes, but the cupcakes didn't use that much. So quadrupling seems to be just the right amount for a 4-layer 8-inch round cake. Please let me know any comments, any ways that I can improve these videos going forward. My daughter's birthday is coming up in about a month and a half, 2 months, and so I'll be doing a cake for her, and if I have anything in between there, I will be sure to record and upload. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.